The night it ended, I stood alone in a restaurant that smelled like spent champagne and seared rosemary, and I remember thinking the lighting was beautiful. Gold and low, like the inside of a jewelry box. One table was still set. Somebody's napkin had slid to the floor. In my right hand I held a single envelope, and my hand wasn't shaking, which surprised me, because everything inside that envelope was about to burn a man's life down to the foundation, but that's the end of it. Let me take you back 10 weeks, to the beginning, when I was still just the woman nobody wanted at the party. My name is Dorothy Kessler. Everyone on Fenwick Row calls me Dot. I'm 61 years old, and for 34 of those years I have opened the Bluebird Diner on the corner of Fenwick and 9th in Cleveland at 5 in the morning. 6 days a week. I know the sound my key makes in that lock the way some people know their own heartbeat. Flip the lights, fire the flat top, start the first pot of coffee before my coat is even off. By 5:40 the griddle is talking, and by 6 the regulars start drifting in out of the dark like they're coming home. My husband Walt built most of that diner with his own 2 hands. The counter, the pie case, the corkboard by the kitchen window where he pinned recipe cards in his terrible handwriting, half print, half cursive, all confidence. He's been gone 6 years now. Heart, in his sleep, no warning, no goodbye. His stool at the end of the counter, third from the register. Still sits there. Nobody takes it. Not because I put up a sign. The regulars just know, people assume a widow with a diner is one bad winter away from broke. I let them assume. It's easier. What the neighborhood doesn't know, what my own daughter doesn't know, is that Walt and I spent 30 years doing something unfashionable. We saved. And every time a building on our block went up for sale cheap, back when Fenwick Row was the part of town cab drivers apologized for, we bought it. Quietly. Through a little company we set up under my maiden name, Marsh, so nobody would connect it to the lady flipping eggs on the corner. Fenwick Row Properties LLC. The paperwork runs through Ray Okafor. Our property manager and attorney for 20 years, a calm, careful man who collects the rents and signs the leases and has never once let my name slip. I'm telling you this now so you understand something later. Because for a long stretch of this story, I'm going to look like the weakest person in every room. I wasn't. I just wasn't done being quiet yet. That October, my son-in-law Grant Callahan was 3 weeks from opening his restaurant. Ember Rye. 3 doors down from the Bluebird, in the old Halloran Furniture Building, brick sandblasted, windows blacked out with paper, a logo in brushed brass that probably cost more than my walk-in freezer. Grant is 34, handsome in that catalog way. Always dressed like he's about to be photographed, always talking about the brand and the concept and elevating the neighborhood. My daughter Brooke married him 5 years ago and started pronouncing things differently. I gave them $40,000 for that restaurant. I want to be honest about how it happened, because it matters. There was no contract. No promissory note. No handshake, even, not really. Brooke came to the diner one slow Tuesday last spring, sat at the counter with her coat still on, and talked for 20 minutes about equipment costs and how the investors wanted to see family commitment before releasing the next round. She never actually asked. She just left a silence sitting on the counter between us. And I did what I have always done with silences in my family. I filled it with money. I wrote the check from mine and Walt's savings, not the company, our personal savings, and Brooke hugged me for the first time in a year, and Grant sent a text that said, "You're the best, Dorothy," with a champagne emoji. He calls me Dorothy. 34 years of everyone calling me Dot, and my own son-in-law calls me Dorothy, like we met at a conference. The dinner happened on a Sunday, the second week of October. My house, my table, my chicken and dumplings, the recipe off Walt's corkboard, the one Brooke used to ask for every birthday until she started asking for reservations instead. I'd ironed the tablecloth. I want you to know that. I'd ironed the tablecloth for people who were about to explain, over my own cooking, why I wasn't good enough to stand in a room they built with my money. They arrived late, and Grant walked in narrating a phone call, one finger raised at me by way of hello. Brooke kissed the air near my cheek. She looked tired under her makeup, thin in a way that's fashionable and worrying at the same time. Through dinner Grant talked about the opening the way generals talk about invasions. A food critic from the City magazine was confirmed. A television segment was, in conversations. And then, somewhere between the dumplings and the pie, he set his fork down and said. So, the launch gala. Friday the 24th. It's going to be the event of the fall. He pulled the invitation from his jacket like a magician producing a dove. Heavy black cardstock, copper lettering, Ember RYE embossed so deep you could read it with your fingertips. He held it up. He turned it in the light. He talked about the guest list, investors, press, the councilwoman, 2 chefs from Chicago flying in. He showed me that invitation for a full minute. He never handed it to me. I actually looked at the empty space next to my plate, waiting for it to land there. It didn't. It went back into his jacket, next to his heart, where he kept the things he valued. It sounds wonderful. I said. What time should I come? The pause that followed had furniture in it. Grant glanced at Brooke. Brooke glanced at her wine. And my daughter, my little girl, who used to fall asleep in the corner booth of the Bluebird under my coat, said, Mom. The gala's really more of an industry thing. Press, investors. It's very, curated, I said. It's a brand-building event, Grant said smoothly, the way he said everything, like the words came pre-buttered. The optics are very specific. Everyone there tells a story about what Ember Rye is. He smiled at me, warm as a heat lamp. You're more the heart behind the scenes, Dorothy. That's honestly more important. What he means, Brooke said quickly, is we're doing a friends and family soft open. Just for you, basically. Before the gala. You'll get the whole experience without all the industry people. When we're finalizing the calendar, Grant said, they never finalized the calendar. I want that on the record. The soft open was never scheduled, never mentioned again, and when I brought it up 2 weeks later, Brooke said, things got so crazy, Mom, in the tone people use for weather. Here is the part that stuck under my skin like a splinter, though. It wasn't the invitation. It was something I heard afterward, secondhand, from Marisol, who cuts hair 2 doors down and hears everything in this neighborhood roughly 9 minutes after it happens. At some tasting event, one of Grant's investor friends had looked out the window toward my corner, toward the Bluebird's old blue neon, and asked what the plan was for, the grease spot on the corner. And Grant, my daughter's husband, $40,000 of my dead husband's savings in his walls, had laughed. Not defended. Not deflected. Laughed, and said something about how every neighborhood has a before picture. I am the before picture. Me. My counter that Walt sanded by hand. My regulars, Earl with his crossword, the night nurses who come in at 7:15 still in scrubs, Father Dominic and his black coffee, 2 sugars, don't tell anyone about the sugars. 40 years of birthdays and funerals and first dates and last conversations. All of it reduced to a stain some men in soft sweaters wanted power washed off their investment. The night of the gala, I did not sit home. I'd like to tell you I did something dignified and defiant, but the truth is I did what I always do. I worked. I stayed late at the Bluebird polishing a counter that was already clean, and through my front window I could see it all 3 doors down, the valet stand, the photographers, the doors opening and closing on bursts of gold light and laughter. I saw Brooke on the sidewalk in a dress the color of pale champagne, glowing, posing, her arm through Grant's. She looked happy. That's the miserable, complicated truth of it. She looked happy. And I stood in my dark diner with a rag in my hand, watching my daughter's beautiful life through glass, like a woman window shopping for her own family. I didn't cry. I'm not built that way anymore, grief renovated me years ago. I just added it to the ledger. That's what I called it, privately, the ledger. The wedding I paid for and sat at table 9. The Thanksgiving they did with friends this year. The way Grant introduced me once, at a farmer's market, as a local fixture. Every entry small enough to swallow. 30 entries deep, you stop noticing you're always the one swallowing. So no, the gala didn't start this. The gala just heard. What started it came 4 days later. On a Wednesday, in a plain white envelope mixed in with a seed catalog in my utility bill. Cuyahoga Commerce Bank, upper left corner. My name, my full legal name, Dorothy M. Kessler, through the little plastic window. I opened it standing at the counter with my thumb, the way you open something you assume is nothing, courtesy notice to guarantor, the first line read. Commercial Bridge Loan #4471, C, Original Principal, $220,000. This notice is provided to you as personal guarantor of the above obligation. I read it twice. Then a third time, slower, the diner very quiet around me, just the compressor humming and Walt's recipe card stirring in the vent draft, guarantor. I had never signed a loan. Not this loan, not any loan, not in that amount, not with that bank. And yet somewhere in a file downtown was a page that said I had, a page with my name on it, secured, I would soon learn, against the one thing in this world with my blood in its floorboards, somebody had signed me up to lose everything. And I had a terrible, cold, growing suspicion that I'd cooked him dinner 2 Sundays ago. The bank was polite about it, in the way institutions are polite when they're holding a knife they don't know is a knife. I called the number on the notice the next morning from my office in the back of the diner, a closet with a desk in it, and asked a woman named Denise to explain what exactly I had guaranteed. Commercial bridge loan, she said. $220,000. Borrower, ER Hospitality Group LLC. Personal guarantor, Dorothy M. Kessler. Executed July 18. Collateral pledged included the guarantor's real property interest at the corner of Fenwick and 9th, my property. My corner. The Bluebirds parcel, promised to a bank as backup for Grant Callahan's restaurant, by a signature I had never given. Could you send me a copy of the executed guarantee? I asked, and my voice came out steady, which is a skill widows have. You learn to order the flowers and pick the casket in the same voice you use to order eggs. Denise said she'd mail it. I said email would be faster. And gave her the diner's address, and it arrived while I was still on the phone thanking her. I printed it in the office and carried it out to the counter, because the light is better there, and because I wanted Walt's stool nearby. Third page, bottom right. Dorothy M. Kessler. Blue ink, supposedly. A notary stamp beside it, an Illinois registered commission. I noted that even then, some cold clerk in the back of my brain filing it away, and a date. July 18th, then I did something I want you to picture, because it's the moment this stopped being a feeling and became a fact. I went to the file cabinet where I keep the diner's paper, 40 years of vendor invoices. Delivery receipts, tax forms, all of it signed by me, thousands of times, in the same tight little signature Walt used to tease me about, the D like a sail, the K collapsing into a scribble by Friday of a long week. I pulled a fistful of invoices across 4 decades and laid them on the counter in a row, and I set the bank's page at the end of the line like the newest kid in a class photo. It was wrong. Not badly wrong. Carefully wrong. The D leaned the way mine leans. The scribble scribbled. Whoever made it had studied me, had a sample, probably my check, the $40,000 check I'd handed over with love, and had practiced. But the pen never lifted where my pen lifts. My signature breathes in 2 places. I've watched my own hand do it for 60 years. This one ran straight through without breathing, smooth and continuous, the signature of someone copying a picture rather than writing a name. He didn't steal my money. He stole my hand. I stood there a long time with those pages. Every instinct I had was loud and simple: call the police. Drive to their house. Slam the paper on Grant's beautiful reclaimed wood table and watch his face do whatever it was going to do. I actually picked up my phone. I got as far as the 9, then I put it down, and I'll tell you why. Because 40 years of running a business teaches you the difference between being right and being able to prove it. And because there was one question I couldn't answer yet, and it was eating me alive faster than the forgery was: did Brooke know? I asked her to coffee that Friday. Not at the Bluebird, neutral ground, one of those places with milk options and no ashtrays of history between us. She came in late, sunglasses on top of her head, apologizing at her phone more than at me. I watched my daughter order a forward drink and I looked for it in her. Guilt has a posture. I've served coffee to men the morning after they cheated and women the morning after they found out. I know what a secret does to shoulders. How's the restaurant doing? I asked. First weeks are hard weeks, it's amazing. She said, too fast, the word polished from use. Covers are insane. There's a wait on weekends. Then a flicker, gone in half a second. I mean, cash flow's always tight at the start. Grant says that's normal. He handles all of it, the investors, the bank stuff. I honestly couldn't tell you what we owe on a fryer. She laughed, and the laugh was real, and that's what told me. She laughed the way you laugh about a thing you truly don't understand, not the way you laugh past a thing you're hiding. Then she did something that broke my heart on a small delay, like frost cracking a pipe. She reached over and squeezed my wrist and said, "We're going to have you in for that dinner soon. Mom. I promise. Things are just so crazy." She didn't know. She didn't know about the loan, which meant she didn't know my name was under it, which meant my daughter was married to a man who had forged her mother's signature and then gone home and slept next to her. I smiled and said crazy was fine, crazy meant busy, busy meant success. I paid for the coffee. Of course I did. 2 days later, the second crack opened, and it came from inside Grant's own walls. Her name is Priya. 24, sharp as a paper cut, keeps the books at Ember Rye 3 mornings a week and eats lunch at my counter because, in her words, my corned beef hash is the only honest thing on this block. She came in on a Tuesday during the dead hour, sat at the far end away from Earl and his crossword, and stirred her coffee about 40 times without drinking it. "Mrs. Kessler," she finally said. "Can I ask you a weird question? You've run a business a long time. If checks at company writes keep bouncing, rent checks, but the owner keeps spending like nothing's wrong, what does that usually mean?" I kept wiping the counter. "It usually means the spending is the point and the rent is the afterthought." "Whose rent?" She glanced at the window, 3 doors down. "I shouldn't. The rent to the landlord bounced in September, and again this month, and when I flagged it he told me the landlord's some out-of-state holding company that takes weeks to process anything and not to worry about it. But the same week he signed off on the heated patio. Do you know what that patio cost? The pergola alone." She stopped herself. "And there's a car. A leased car that runs through the business. I keep the books, Mrs. Kessler. I can't make them add up, and when I ask, he smiles at me. I don't like being smiled at like that. Why tell me?" She looked at me straight on, and I saw her decide something. "Because Brooke's your daughter. And because if this place goes down the way I think it might, it takes people with it who did nothing wrong. The line cooks. The dishwasher, Manny, he's got twins." She pushed her coffee away. "I'm not trying to start anything. I just needed to say it to an adult." "You did right," I told her, and I meant it more than she could possibly have understood, because the landlord whose checks were bouncing, the faceless, slow, out-of-state holding company Grant wasn't worried about, was sitting across the counter from her in an apron, refilling her cup, the third crack I went looking for, though I'll swear to my grave it started as an accident. That Thursday I was across town at the restaurant supply wholesaler. The Bluebird needed a new prep table. Some things in my life are still that simple, and the wine bar next door had its patio doors open to the warm October evening. I heard Grant's voice before I saw him. That voice carries. It's built to. He was at an outside table with a man I recognized from the gala photos in the neighborhood paper, Vincent Sarno. Developer. Silver at the temples, watch you could see from across a street, one of those men who says, "The market, the way priests say, the Lord." I should have kept walking. Instead I sat down on the wholesaler's loading bench with my receipt in my hand like a woman resting her feet, 15 feet and 1 lattice of fake ivy away, and I listened to my son-in-law sell my life. "The corner lot is the whole play, Vince," Grant was saying. You said it yourself, you can't anchor the block with a 50-year-old diner squatting on the best parcel. But it's handled. It's family. The old lady's alone, she's tired, the place barely clears costs. A pause, ice moving in a glass. You put a respectful number in front of her, I do the emotional side, a nice condo, no more 5 a.m.s, more time with Brooke. She'll cry a little and sign. She lives for Brooke. That's the lever, that's the lever. I want you to sit with that phrase the way I had to. My love for my daughter, described to a stranger over a glass of Barolo as a piece of machinery. Vincent's voice was lower, harder to catch, but I caught enough. And if she doesn't sell? And Grant laughed, the same laugh, I'd bet the diner, that he laughed for the grease spot joke, and said. Everybody sells, Vince. You just have to make staying more expensive than leaving. I rode the bus home because I didn't trust my hands on a steering wheel. Not from grief. From arithmetic. Somewhere between the wholesaler and my stop, the hurt finished converting into something with corners and weight, something you could stack and count. He had forged my name for $220,000. He had pledged my diner without my knowledge. He was bouncing rent he didn't know he was bouncing to me. And now he was planning to price me off my own corner using my daughter as the crowbar. Fine, I thought. Let's count everything. Ray Okafor's office is on the second floor above the old pharmacy. 4 buildings of mine away from the Bluebird, though not even the pharmacist knows that. Ray has managed Fenwick Row properties for 20 years, collected the rents, signed the leases, argued with the city about sidewalks, always as the company's representative, never once naming the woman behind it. He's 58, drinks his coffee black, and reads documents the way other men read box scores. I put it all on his desk Saturday morning. The bank notice. The guarantee with its wrong, breathless signature. My row of invoices. Priya's bounced rent dates, which I'd written down the moment she left. What I'd heard on that patio, word for word, because some things you don't forget. You transcribe, Ray read for a long time. When he finally looked up, he took his glasses off, which in 20 years I have learned means the weather is about to change. First, he said, we do not call the police today. I know. But hear me. If this surfaces now, his lawyer calls it a paperwork mix-up, says you signed things for the family and forgot, says the wrong page got stapled into a stack. It becomes your memory against his smile, and I've seen his smile. We seal it first. Handwriting examiner. The notary's log, that stamp is an Illinois commission, which is strange for a Cleveland loan, and strange is where cases live. Where were you on July 18th? Where was Brooke? He wrote as he talked. And I want a forensic accountant on that restaurant's money. There's a woman I trust, Carmen Diaz. Expensive. Worth it, hire her, I said. Today, there's something else. Ray pulled a file from his cabinet, one of mine, one of the hundreds he keeps, and slid a document across the desk, turned so I could read it. A commercial lease, signed 11 months ago, for the old Halloran Furniture Building. Tenant, ER Hospitality Group LLC, by its managing member, Grant T. Callahan, his signature big and slanted and pleased with itself. Landlord, Fenwick Row Properties LLC. Ray tapped the landlord's line once, gently, like a man knocking on a door he already has the key to. He signed with Fenwick Row Properties, Ray said. He signed with you. I sat with that lease in my hands for a long minute, reading my own company's name like it belonged to a stranger. 11 months ago, Grant Callahan had signed a document promising rent, insurance, and good behavior to Fenwick Row Properties LLC. He'd never asked who that was. Why would he? To him, a landlord was a mail slot in another state, a slow machine that cashed checks. He had built his glass and brass dream inside a building owned by the grease spot on the corner, and he didn't know it. Walk me through what this means, I said. Practically, Ray put his glasses back on, which meant we were working now. It means you don't have to invent a single thing. You don't threaten, you don't scheme, you don't touch him. You simply become what he already agreed to. A landlord enforcing a lease is not revenge. It's Tuesday. He pulled a legal pad toward him. So here's what we do. We audit his tenancy, every clause, every obligation, everything the lease requires that he may not be doing. We let Carmen follow the money. And you, he pointed the pen at me, gently, you do the hardest job of all. You go be his mother-in-law. Wounded, harmless, and slightly boring. Can you do that? I thought about 40 years of swallowing. Ray, I said, I've been in rehearsal my whole life. The brunch happened the next Sunday, at their house this time, one of those meals where the orange juice comes in a carafe and nobody's comfortable. Grant was riding high. The gala had landed, the city magazine had run a piece calling Ember Rye, the boldest opening of the fall, and he had it up on his phone before I'd gotten my coat off, scrolling to the good sentences for me like a boy showing off a report card. The critic comes back anonymously for the starred review, he said. That's the one that matters. 4 to 6 weeks out. By the holidays, Dorothy, there'll be a wait list past New Year's. That's wonderful, Grant, I said, and here is the thing I need you to understand, I made it sound wonderful. I asked about the menu. I asked about the chef. I asked, God forgive me, about the heated patio, and listened to him describe a pergola I now knew violated Section 9 of his lease, and I said it sounded lovely, and I passed him the fruit salad. There is a particular kind of strength in being underestimated on purpose. It doesn't feel like strength while you're doing it. It feels like eating glass with a smile. But every minute he spent believing I was a sad old woman knitting in his blind spot was a minute my people spent counting. Brooke was quieter than usual that morning. Twice I caught her watching Grant with an expression I recognized from her childhood, the face she made at math problems that wouldn't come out right. When I was leaving, she followed me onto the porch with my coat and stood there a beat too long. Mom. Does a business that's doing great ever not pay people? What people? Nothing. A vendor called the house. Grant said it's an accounting transition thing. She rubbed her thumb over her wedding band, around and around. It's fine. He handles it, I'm sure he does, I said, and hugged her, and felt how thin she'd gotten, and drove home with my hands at 10 and 2, doing arithmetic again. The audit came back to Ray's office 9 days later, and it was worse for Grant than even I had guessed. 3 defaults, documented in the dry, merciless language of property law. 1. Unauthorized construction. The heated patio, the pergola, the gas lines, the electrical run, had been built without landlord consent, without permits filed to the landlord, in direct violation of the alterations clause. A structural change to a 100-year-old building, done on the sneak, because asking permission was for people who thought rules applied to them. 2. Rent. The September check had bounced, been quietly redeposited by Ray's office per standard practice, and cleared 11 days late. October's had bounced twice and, as of the audit date, remained unpaid. Under the lease, 2 late or failed payments in a rolling 12-month period was an event of default all on its own. 3. And Ray called this one the loaded gun, insurance. The lease required commercial general liability coverage, $2 million aggregate, landlord named as additional insured, proof on file at all times. Grant's policy had lapsed in August. Not reduced. Lapsed. He was running a packed restaurant, open flames and oyster bars and 140 covers on a Saturday, with no liability coverage at all, in my building. If a server dropped a fryer basket, if a guest slipped on that beautiful patio, the lawsuits would come looking for the property owner. For me. Ray read that part twice out loud, and the second time his voice had an edge I'd only heard from him once before, at Walt's funeral. This isn't just default. This is him gambling with your block to save $400 a month. Carmen Diaz called us that same week. She talked fast and precise, like a woman billing by the syllable, and what she traced would have been funny if it weren't my name holding it up. Of the $220,000 from the forged loan, less than half had gone anywhere near the build-out it was supposedly for. The rest told a story. $38,000 to an event production company, the Gala. The lighting, the flowers, the string quartet, the photographers who'd shot my daughter glowing on the sidewalk. 11,000 to a public relations firm. And $940 a month, paid by the business, for the lease on a German sports car that I had personally watched Grant park across 2 spaces outside Ember Rye like the curb had wronged him. He hadn't forged my name to build something. He'd forged my name to look like something. My signature, my hand, my diner, my dead husband's corner, was collateral for a party I wasn't allowed to attend and a car I wasn't supposed to touch. There's a pattern here, prosecutors like, Carmen said. Loan proceeds diverted from stated purpose, personal benefit, concealment. Keep everything. Change nothing. Don't spook him. We didn't spook him. We mailed him an envelope. It went out from Ray's office on a Thursday, printed on Fenwick Row Properties letterhead, as bland and procedural as a jury summons. A notice to cure, itemized defaults, the unauthorized alterations, the rent arrears. The lapsed insurance, with 30 days to remedy all 3, per Section 14 of the lease, failing which the landlord reserved all rights and remedies including termination. Certified mail, return receipt requested. Standard. Boring. The kind of letter a busy, important man in a borrowed sports car glances at, decides is landlord noise, and drops on a pile, which is, as best we can reconstruct, exactly what he did. The green certified mail card came back with a scrawl from someone at the restaurant. Priya mentioned, without knowing what she was mentioning, that some legal-looking thing from the landlord had sat on Grant's desk under a food magazine for a week, and that when she'd asked, he'd said, out-of-state paper pushers. I'll have Vince's guy look at it eventually. The clock was running, certified and signed for, and the man it was running on couldn't hear it ticking over the sound of his own good press, and the press was good. I'll give him that. Opening month, Ember Rye glowed. I'd close the Bluebird at 8, kill my lights, and stand at my dark front window with a cup of decaf, watching the crowd 3 doors down, the valet line, the women in good coats, the warm gold spilling out every time the door swung. Some nights I stood there with the default file in my hand, actually holding it, the way you'd hold a menu while deciding. That's what it felt like. Not rage. Selection. I knew something every glittering person in that line didn't. The building they were laughing inside of had a 30-day fuse burning in it, lit by the tenant himself, and the quiet woman across the street holding a manila folder was the only person on earth who could stamp it out. I want to be honest with you about those nights, because this story doesn't work if I lie. I wavered. Not about Grant, never once about Grant. About Brooke. Because there was no version of this where the fuse reached the end and my daughter's life didn't shake. Her marriage, her house, her name on that mailbox, all of it was mortared into his. Some nights I'd watch her through the restaurant's window, moving between tables in the hostess wife role he'd built for her, laughing the laugh I used to get for free, and I'd think, I am holding a file that ends this. And then I'd think about the phrase that's the lever, and my grip would steady all by itself. In the middle of all of it, the squeeze arrived, right on schedule, wearing a nice suit. It came to Ray, of course, because everything for Fenwick Row Properties comes to Ray. A letter from Sarno Development Group, thick paper, embossed, the works, expressing strong interest in acquiring the parcel at the corner of Fenwick and 9th. The offer was 22% over any honest appraisal of the lot. Above market, unsolicited. With a gentle line about the seller's opportunity to simplify their holdings that I read in Grant's voice whether it was written in it or not. There was even a soft deadline, the way these letters always have, dressed up as enthusiasm. Ray dated it, copied it, and filed the original in the fireproof cabinet next to the forged guarantee. Confirmation, he said. The pitch you overheard is live money now. Vincent's group wants your corner. Grant told them he could deliver it, and this letter is the down payment on that promise. He almost smiled. They're negotiating to buy a lot from a little old lady, and their letter got opened by the little old lady's lawyer, in the little old lady's building. 4 doors from the little old lady. I've been doing this 30 years, It never stops being satisfying. We sent back 2 sentences. the owner had no present interest in selling, future correspondence could be directed to this office. Polite. Bloodless. Somewhere across town, I imagined Grant reading a forwarded copy and telling Vincent it was an opening position. Everybody sells. You just have to make staying more expensive than leaving. He still thought he was the one setting prices. By the second week of November, the pieces were stacked the way Ray wanted them. The handwriting examiner's preliminary report, strong indications the question signature was not authored by the exemplar writer, my breathing signature. Laid against the smooth counterfeit, reduced to clinical certainty. Carmen's money map, color-coded. The Illinois notary lead, which Ray was still pulling on with a quiet patience that scared me a little. The cure notice, signed for, 16 days from expiring. Priya's dates. Vincent's letter. All of it sealed in a file that grew heavier by the week while I flipped eggs and said that's wonderful, Grant, and waited. 2 clocks, Ray kept saying. Ours, which we control, the 30 days. And the banks, which we don't. Because banks review their loan files, on their own schedules, for their own reasons, and somewhere downtown loan #4471C was sitting in a drawer like a landmine with my name on the trigger plate. I understood the words when he said them. I didn't understand them in my body until the Tuesday before Thanksgiving week, 2:15, dead hour at the Bluebird, when the phone on the wall rang, the diner line, the number in the book, Mrs. Kessler. This is Todd Brennan, Loan Review Department, Cuyahoga Commerce Bank. Young voice, reading from a screen. This is a routine verification call. We're conducting a periodic review of a commercial credit facility on which you're listed as personal guarantor, and I just need to confirm a few details of your guarantee. Do you have a moment? I looked down the empty counter, past Walt's stool, to the window and the brass letters 3 doors down. The bank had found the loan. The review was live. And whatever I said in the next 30 seconds would either spring the trap early, before the file was sealed, before Brooke was safe, or feed the fuse in a way none of us could take back. Of course, I said, in my ordering eggs voice. Though I should tell you, I think there's been some confusion. Todd Brennan asked, and I could hear him sit up straighter through the phone. Ray had prepared me for this call the way you prepare somebody for a deposition. Weeks earlier, in his office, he'd made me rehearse it. If the bank ever contacts you, you do not accuse. You do not explain. You do not say the word forgery out loud to a 26-year-old in loan review. You say one sentence, and then you hand it to me. So I said the sentence, I have no record of ever executing a guarantee for that loan, and any questions about it should go to my attorney, Raymond Okafor. I'll have him send you a letter today. There was a pause, the sound of a young man realizing his routine call had just stopped being routine. He took Ray's number. He thanked me twice. He hung up, and I stood in my empty diner holding the receiver, listening to the dial tone, understanding that I had just rolled a stone downhill and there was no walking it back up. Ray's letter went out that afternoon. Formal, surgical, 3 paragraphs. Mrs. Kessler disputes the authenticity of the guarantee. Reserves all rights, requests the complete loan file including notarization records, and asks that the bank conduct its review accordingly. No accusations. No names. Just a locked door and a polite knock on the other side of it. Now we find out what kind of man he is, Ray said, when a bank asks him a direct question. We found out in 4 days. I got it from Priya first, in pieces, over a lunch counter, how 2 people from Cuyahoga Commerce had come to Ember Rye on a Monday morning, dark suits before the lunch shift, and sat with Grant in the private dining room for over an hour. How Grant had come out of that room the color of skim milk and cancelled his afternoon. How he'd spent the rest of the week making calls with his office door shut. Which he never did, because Grant liked doors open so people could hear him being important, but the part that mattered, the part that changed the shape of everything I was building, I got from Carmen, who got it through the formal channel once Ray's dispute letter entitled us to see the file. Because when the bank asked Grant to explain how a guarantee disputed by its own guarantor had ended up in his loan package, Grant did not panic, and he did not confess. He aimed. His written response to the bank, dated that Thursday, is a document I have read maybe 30 times, and it still stops my breath in the same place. He expressed surprise and concern at the dispute. He stated that he had no direct involvement in the collection of the family guarantee. And then this sentence, his sentence, typed by him or for him, reviewed by him, sent by him, all family documentation for the July financing was coordinated and executed through my wife, Brooke Callahan, who handled the paperwork with her mother directly. He put his wife under it. He took the crime he had committed against my hand and set it down, gently, deliberately, on my daughter, and here is the part that made it dangerous instead of just vile, it was plausible. Because there had been a signing session. Carmen found it in the file. Back in July, Grant had brought home what he'd called closing paperwork for the restaurant, a stack half an inch thick, and Brooke had signed where the little arrow flags told her to sign. Page after page, trusting her husband the way I had once trusted a silence on my counter. Her real signature was all through that loan file, on personal guarantees of her own, on disclosures, on authorizations. A stack like that is a forest. One forged tree hides in it beautifully. If a prosecutor ever squinted at that file, the story Grant was selling, the wife shuttled papers to her mother, something got signed that shouldn't have, who can say how, would have my daughter's fingerprints on it before it ever had his. I found this out on a Thursday afternoon. Brooke found out something that same night, on her own, in her own house, and the two discoveries collided at my diner door at 8 minutes past midnight. I was still there. I'd been staying late those weeks, the Bluebird after hours had become my war room, and sleep and I weren't on speaking terms anyway. The knock was soft, then hard, then her voice, and I unlocked the door to my daughter standing under the blue neon in pajama pants and a wool coat, no makeup, mascara from the day cried down her face in gray tracks. In her hand was a fistful of paper, crushed the way you hold something you'd like to strangle. Mom. I need you to look at something and tell me I'm crazy. I sat her at the counter. I did not turn on the main lights, just the pie case, that soft warm glow, and my daughter's ruined face lit up by lemon meringue and Dutch apple like a painting of exactly what it was. She smoothed the papers out on the counter with both hands, loan statements. Cuyahoga Commerce Bank. ER Hospitality Group. $220,000, they were in his golf bag, she said. The zipper pocket. I wasn't snooping, I was looking for the garage key, and, Mom, we don't have a loan for $220,000. I would know. I signed everything for the restaurant, he had me sign a whole stack, and this wasn't. She stopped. Her finger had found the line. Guarantor, Dorothy M. Kessler. Her finger stayed on my name like she was taking its pulse. Why is your name on this, now? I want you to understand the wire I was walking in that moment, because I walked it in the dark with my daughter's heart on the other side. I could not tell her everything. If she knew about Fenwick Row, about the file, about the 30-day fuse, everything I'd built lived or died on Grant not seeing it coming, and Brooke was still going home to sleep next to Grant. But I could not tell her nothing, because the man she was going home to had, for days earlier, laid her under the wheels of a fraud investigation in writing. And she didn't know it, and I did, so I told her the middle. The true middle, my name is on it, I said, because someone signed it there. And it wasn't me. She looked at me for a long 3 seconds. What does that mean? It means, Brooke, that I never saw that document until the bank sent me a courtesy notice a month ago. It means the signature on that guarantee is a copy of mine, made by someone who had my signature to copy. It means my diner, this building, the one you're sitting in, was pledged to a bank without my knowledge. I kept my voice level. Ordering eggs level. That's called forgery. And there are exactly 2 adults who handled that loan. I watched it move through her. I've seen a lot of faces at this counter over 40 years, I've watched people get bad news over coffee more times than I can count, and I have never watched anything like my daughter's face doing that math. Denial first, fast and hot, he wouldn't, there's an explanation, Grant is careless with paperwork but he would never. Then her own hands slowing down on the statements. Then, quietly, the thing that broke her, not the crime, but the geometry of it, I signed a stack in July, she said, barely out loud. He flagged the pages. He stood right there while I did it. Mom. Her head came up. If your signature is fake, and mine is real, all over that same file, she didn't finish it. She didn't have to. I watched my daughter arrive, all by herself, at the place her husband had built for her. The person holding the pen in every provable moment was Brooke. He'd let it be me, she whispered. Not a question. Her hand went to her mouth, and she made a sound I hadn't heard from her since she was 9 years old and her dog died, and I came around the counter and held my daughter for the first time in 3 years while she shook under the pie light. Here's the confession I owe you. Standing there with her hair against my cheek, part of me was grieving and part of me was recalculating, cold as a ledger, because that's what I'd become by November, and I won't pretend otherwise. The plan as built ended with everything detonating at once, the forgery, the defaults, all of it. But a detonation doesn't check who's standing nearby. If the fraud file went to the bank or a prosecutor as it stood, Grant's my wife handled it story was sitting there waiting, pre-planted, with Brooke's genuine signatures around it like kindling. I built the trap so carefully I nearly caught my own daughter in it, so the plan changed that night, at that counter, while she cried. It was no longer enough to prove the signature was false. I had to prove, to a courtroom standard, that it could only be his. Not probably. Only, when she'd cried herself quiet, I asked her the question I'd been holding for an hour. Brooke. July 18th. Middle of the month, a Friday. Where were you? She blinked at the strangeness of it, wiped her face, pulled out her phone with the muscle memory of her generation. Scrolled. Chicago, she said. The retail marketing conference. I was there the whole. Why does that matter? It mattered because the forged guarantee was notarized on July 18th. It mattered because Ray had already traced that Illinois notary commission to a woman on the payroll of Sarno Development Group, Vincent's company, headquartered in Chicago, notary parked in their Cleveland office. It mattered because if the notarization happened in Cleveland on a day my daughter was verifiably 200 miles away in a conference session, then no version of Brooke handled the paperwork with her mother could survive contact with a calendar. Send me everything from that trip, I said. Hotel bill. The conference registration. Anything with a date and your name, Mom. Why? Because the paper is going to matter, sweetheart. Paper is the only thing that's going to matter. I took her hands. And now I need you to do the hardest thing I have ever asked of you. Go home. Say nothing. Not one word, not one strange look, not one question about golf bags. Can you do that? You want me to sleep in that house like I don't know? I want you safe. Right now, safe and silent are the same thing. A few more days. I promise you. Brooke, I promise you on your father's stool, this gets answered. But not tonight, and not by shouting. She looked at me a long time. Somewhere in that look, I think, was the first flicker of a question she wouldn't know to ask for another 2 weeks. What exactly does my mother know, and how? But she was too wrecked to chase it. She nodded. She hugged me at the door, hard, like she used to. And then my daughter walked back out under the blue neon to go lie down next to the man who'd volunteered her for his crime, and I locked the door and stood in my dark diner and did not sleep 1 minute. That was the longest night. Not the night it ended, this one. Because for 11 hours I did not know which way she'd break. She was terrified, she was married, and terrified married people do unpredictable things at 2 in the morning. Half a lifetime of loving Grant Callahan doesn't dissolve over a golf bag. If she woke him, if she cried it out of herself, if she gave him even the shape of what I'd said, he'd know the forgery was found, and a cornered man with his paperwork instincts would spend the next week papering over his tracks and sharpening the Brooke story. I flipped eggs at 6 a.m. with my phone face up next to the flat top like a heart monitor. At 9:40 her text came, sent you the hotel folio and my conference badge scans. Didn't sleep. Didn't say anything. He left early whistling. And then, a minute later, a second text, 5 words that told me which side of the wire my daughter had landed on. He was whistling, Mom. The badge scans were better than I'd dared hope. The conference used electronic check-ins, every session she'd attended, time-stamped. July 18, 1:47 p.m. Central Time, Brooke Callahan scanned into a breakout session called Retail Storytelling in the Digital Age in a Chicago hotel ballroom. The notary log, when Ray's subpoena-shaped request finally shook it loose from Sarno Development's Cleveland office, showed the guarantee notarized that same day at 3:05 p.m. Eastern, 2:05 Central, in Cleveland, Ohio, personal appearance of signer attested. One signature in the log's appearance column that was not mine and was not Brooke's and slanted big and pleased with itself, 18 minutes. My daughter was scanned into a ballroom in Illinois 18 minutes before someone stood in an office in Ohio pretending to be me. You cannot be the courier of a fraud from a conference breakout session. The story Grant had preloaded didn't just fail, it inverted. Every piece of it now pointed one direction, and the notary who'd falsely attested my appearance worked for the man Grant was, at that very moment, crawling to for money, because he was crawling. The pressure had finally reached his hands. November's rent didn't bounce, it never came at all. No check, no wire, no excuse to Priya, who watched the payable sit there going red and told me about it over hash with her voice carefully flat. Under the lease, a flat missed payment inside the cure period wasn't just another default. It was the last one. The fuse had reached the powder, all that remained was choosing the hour, and Grant, feeling the floor tilt without understanding why, the bank circling, vendors calling the house, a landlord's legal letter he'd finally, belatedly, actually read, did what men like him do. He went to money. Priya heard the half of the call that happened in the office with the door not quite shut, Grant's voice with all the butter scraped off it. Asking Vincent for a bridge. A personal loan, 6 figures, just to get through the quarter. You know the corner lot thing is still live, Vince, this changes nothing. Vincent, to his credit, and it's the only credit I'll ever extend the man, did not wire money on charm. He was a developer, not a friend. He sent his own people into Grant's finances first, quiet due diligence before quiet dollars, the way you'd inspect a foundation before buying the house, and on the last Friday of November, Vincent Sarno's due diligence found what my 40 years of invoices had found, a $220,000 loan, guaranteed by Dorothy M. Kessler, notarized by his own company's notary. On a day his own notary's log couldn't survive, Ray called me at closing time. I can still hear exactly how he said it, slow, almost amused, a man watching a river reverse course. Sarno Development just contacted my office. Mr. Sarno is requesting a private meeting. Not with me. A pause. With my client. He'd like to meet the owner of Fenwick Row Properties. We held the meeting on a Sunday afternoon, in Ray's office above the pharmacy, because I wanted Vincent Sarno to climb a narrow staircase over a drugstore to find out who he'd been dealing with. Small rooms humble big men. Walt taught me that. Vincent arrived in weekend clothes that cost more than my furnace, took the chair Ray offered, and looked politely past me, the gray-haired woman by the window, waiting for the owner of Fenwick Row Properties to walk in. Ray let that silence sit for exactly as long as it deserved. Then he said, Mr. Sarno, you've met my client. Dorothy Kessler. She owns the Bluebird Diner. She also owns the building your associate's restaurant sits in, the building this office sits in, and 11 other parcels on Fenwick Row, and has since before your company existed. I have watched a lot of things in my 61 years. I had never watched a man reshelve an entire person in real time. Vincent looked at me, actually looked, for the first time, and I could see the file cabinet of his mind pulling my folder out of obstacle. Elderly and refiling it somewhere with a much better view. To his credit, he didn't sputter. Men like Vincent don't sputter, they recalculate, Mrs. Kessler, he said slowly. The corner lot, I agreed. The one Grant promised he could deliver. The one your letter offered to buy from a tired old woman. Tell me, Mr. Sarno, before we talk about why you asked for this meeting, how did my son-in-law describe me? He had the decency not to answer that. Instead he opened his portfolio and did the thing self-preserving men do best, he cut his losses out loud. His due diligence had found the loan. His counsel had reviewed the notary log, his notary, his office. His exposure. The log showed a personal appearance on July 18 that his own employee now admitted, in a signed statement his lawyers had extracted within 48 hours of finding the problem, never happened. Grant had come in alone. Grant had presented a signed guarantee. Grant had told the notary the mother-in-law was elderly and housebound and had signed it at home, and slipped her $200 to stamp it as witnessed. The notary was cooperating fully in exchange for Sarno Development throwing her overboard gently instead of suddenly. "I want to be plain about my position," Vincent said. "I have withdrawn all pending and contemplated financing to Mr. Callahan. My company's offer on your parcel is rescinded, with my apology for its framing. And this," he slid a folder across Ray's desk, "is a certified copy of the notary's log and her statement. My attorneys felt it was in everyone's interest that the record travel to the injured party directly, everyone's interest. What he meant was, the fraud touched my payroll, and I am buying distance from it by the pound. I didn't need him to be good. I needed him to be accurate, and rats leaving a ship are the most accurate animals alive. One question," I said, as he stood to leave. "At the wine bar, in October. He told you everybody sells. That you just have to make staying more expensive than leaving." Vincent went very still, doing the math on how I could know that. I let him not solve it. "You should know it's the only true thing he ever told you. He just had the names backwards." Vincent Sarno looked at me for a moment, and then, "I'll be honest, I didn't expect it," he laughed. "Once, short, real. Mrs. Kessler," he said, "if you ever decide to develop that block yourself, call my office." And he went down the narrow stairs and out of this story, lighter by one partner and heavier by one lesson. Ray and I sat with the folder for a long time after. The notary's statement was the last plank. With it, the file was no longer strong. It was airtight. Handwriting analysis. The money trail. The Chicago badge scans against the notary log, my daughter provably in another state while a bribed stamp swore I stood in a Cleveland office. The lease, 3 defaults deep, its cure period now expired and its final rent flatly unpaid. And Grant's own letter to the bank, blaming his wife, sitting on top of the stack like a signed confession to his character, when? Ray asked. Just that, I knew when. The whole neighborhood knew when. Ember Rye's 1-month anniversary press dinner was that Thursday, the follow-up piece, the food bloggers, the councilwoman coming back for a photo. Grant had been talking about it for 2 weeks the way drowning men talk about the shore. Thursday. I said. After the last guest leaves. Not before. I won't do it to the staff, and I won't do it to the food. Ray raised an eyebrow. It's a good kitchen, Ray. That was never the kitchen's fault. Thursday night, I closed the Bluebird early and dressed in my funeral clothes, which are also my wedding clothes, which tells you what my closet thinks of big occasions. Then I stood at my dark window and watched the dinner 3 doors down, the flashbulbs, the arrivals, Grant on the sidewalk shaking hands like a man running for office, my daughter beside him in the champagne-colored dress, performing the last hour of a life she already knew was over. She'd kept her silence 11 days. I will admire that for the rest of mine. At 11:20 the last taxi pulled away. At 11:25, Priya, who knew only that she should call Brooke if anything happened tonight, and who I suspect knew everything anyway, because bookkeepers always do, propped the side door and went home. At 11:30, Ray and I walked 3 doors down Fenwick Row, and I carried 1 envelope, and here we are. The place I started this story, the dining room was gold and low-lit, warm as the inside of a jewelry box, smelling of spent champagne and seared rosemary. Chairs up on half the tables. 1 table still fully set, the press table, the good one by the window, and somebody's napkin on the floor beside it. The bottle from the last toast still sweated in its bucket. And Grant stood at the pass with his tie loosened and his phone in his hand, glowing with the particular joy of a man reading his own coverage, and he looked up and saw his mother-in-law standing in his restaurant at midnight with a lawyer. Dorothy? A laugh started and died in his throat. "We're closed." "Is everything, is Brooks fine?" I said. "Sit down, Grant, I want to tell you I savored it. The truth is stranger." What I felt, walking to that press table, was mostly calm, the calm of a woman who has counted everything twice. I straightened a fork that had been left crooked. Old habit. 40 years of tables. Then I set the envelope down in the center of the white cloth, and Ray sat, and opened his briefcase, and began laying the contents out one page at a time, like a man dealing a hand that was over before it was shuffled. "Notice of lease termination," Ray said. "Fenwick Row Properties LLC, effective on service. 3 uncured defaults, itemized, unauthorized structural alterations, chronic rent arrears including November's rent, never paid at all, and operating this establishment without liability insurance since August." He set down the next page. "Copy of a commercial loan guarantee bearing the forged signature of Dorothy M. Kessler. Forensic handwriting analysis. Notarization log from the Office of Sarno Development. With the notary's sworn statement that Mrs. Kessler never appeared." Next page. "Conference attendance records placing Brooke Callahan in Chicago at the moment of that notarization, which is relevant, Mr. Callahan, because of this." And he set down the letter. Grant's letter. Coordinated and executed through my wife. Grant looked at the pages the way you'd look at your own X-rays. "This is," he started, and reached for the voice, the buttered one, the one that had worked his whole life. "There's obviously been a misunderstanding with the landlord's office. I've been dealing with an out-of-state, Grant," I said quietly. "Fenwick Row is a street. Marsh is my maiden name. There is no out-of-state office. I watched it not land, and then land. I'm your landlord, Grant. I always was. You built all of this inside a building owned by the grease spot on the corner." The silence that followed had a texture. He looked at me, and at Ray, and back at me, and I watched him run every play he owned. "Denial, that's not, the lease says, it says Fenwick Row Properties, and here are the formation documents, sole member Dorothy Marsh Kessler." Rage, half a second of it, his palm flat on the table hard enough to jump the forks. "You set me up." "No," said Ray, mild as milk, "you signed a lease, you stopped paying it, and you forged a signature, we merely kept receipts." Bargaining, the worst one, the one where his voice went soft and reasonable, and he said, "Dorothy. Family works these things out. Let me get Vince on the phone, we restructure, everyone's whole, call him," I said. Grant looked at me. He picked up his phone. He found the name. And then he stopped, thumb over the screen, because some animal part of him had finally caught up to the room. Vincent's notary, in my stack, cooperating. Vincent's log, certified, in front of him. The long beat where he held that phone was the closest thing to honesty I ever saw from Grant Callahan. He set it down without calling. There was no one on the other end of him anymore. "What do you want?" he said, and it wasn't a question, it was a surrender asking for terms. "2 things are going to happen tonight," I said, "and you're going to choose which order." I opened the envelope, the one from the beginning, the one I'd carried 3 doors down, and took out 2 documents. "This is a letter to Cuyahoga Commerce Bank, in your name, confessing that you alone forged my guarantee, that your wife had no knowledge or involvement, and that you will make full restitution. And this is a surrender of ER Hospitality's assets, the fixtures, the equipment, the name, to the landlord, in satisfaction of the defaults and damages under your lease. You sign both, you cooperate with the bank completely. And this file stays a bank matter and a lease matter." I laid my hand flat on the rest of the stack. "You decline, and Ray drives this to the county prosecutor's office when it opens, with the notary's statement stapled to the letter where you blamed my daughter. Those are the options, Grant. Confession or evidence. You will not get a third, you're talking about my whole life." "No," I said, and for the first and only time that night my voice came up off the floor. "You put my whole life under a loan for a party I wasn't invited to. You bounced rent to me while you mocked me to investors. And when the bank came asking, you slid my daughter under the wheels in writing. Your life, Grant, is the only thing on this table you put there yourself." The side door opened. Brooke stood in it, coat over her pajamas, Priya's call still lit on the phone in her hand, and I don't know how long she'd been outside listening, but from her face it had been long enough. Long enough for Fenwick Row is my maiden name. Long enough for the letter. She crossed that gold room slowly, looking at her mother like a stranger she'd known her whole life, and picked up Grant's letter to the bank, and read her own name in her husband's defense of himself, and set it back down with 2 fingers, "The way you put down something dead, sign it," she said to him. "That's all." 2 words. In a voice I recognized, because it was mine, he signed. I want the record to show it took him 4 minutes to pick up the pen and 4 seconds to use it, the letter, then the surrender, his big slanted signature suddenly small on the page. Ray notarized nothing and promised nothing, he just dated, witnessed, and filed, calm as a Tuesday. Grant sat in his beautiful, forfeited dining room, in the wreckage of his 1-month anniversary, and asked the only honest question of his career, "What happens to me now?" "The bank happens to you," Ray said, packing the briefcase. "Restitution happens to you." And a great deal of quiet. He stood. "I'd start tonight." Brooke walked out with me. Not with her husband, that matters, so I'm saying it plainly. My daughter walked out of that restaurant on her mother's arm and left Grant Callahan sitting alone under the gold light with the champagne going flat in its bucket. Outside, Fenwick Row was cold and still, the streetlights doing their old faithful work down the block, the pharmacy, Marisol's, the hardware, the Bluebird's dark neon on the corner. Brooke stopped on the sidewalk. She looked back once at the brass letters, then down the street, and I watched a lifetime of assumptions reorganize behind her eyes. "Mom," she said. "How much of this street is yours?" I didn't answer with a number. I just looked down the row. Porch light by porch light, one building at a time, all the way to the corner, and let my daughter count. The bank moved faster than I expected and slower than Brooke wanted. Institutions are like that. They take a confession the way a stomach takes a heavy meal, in stages. Grant's letter went in on Friday. By the following week, Cuyahoga Commerce had accepted a restitution plan, the forged guarantee voided, my name scrubbed from their files with a letter of apology I framed out of spite and then took down out of taste, and Grant personally on the hook for every diverted dollar, on a schedule that would follow him like weather for the next decade. The bank, having gotten its money's path secured and its embarrassment contained, chose not to refer the matter for prosecution. That was always the likeliest ending, and I'd made my peace with it in Ray's office weeks before. I didn't need Grant in a courtroom. I needed him accountable, unarmed, and gone. Gone happened on a Tuesday. Marisol saw it, of course Marisol saw it, the German sports car idling outside the house while Grant carried boxes, the lease on the car itself due to collapse within the month, a man driving out of Ohio in a vehicle he could no longer afford toward a cousin in Arizona who, by all accounts, had not exactly extended the invitation. He didn't stop at the Bluebird. He didn't call me. The only message he ever sent came 6 weeks later. An email to Ray's office with lawyer-shaped language in it, hinting that the asset surrender had been signed under duress and might be revisited. I'll admit my stomach dropped when Ray read it to me. Then Ray typed his reply while I watched, 1 sentence long, and read it aloud before sending. "Our file remains complete and available to the county prosecutor at your convenience." We never heard from Grant Callahan again. Paper holds, if you build it right. Walt used to say the same thing about counters. The divorce was quiet. Brooke filed, Grant signed from Arizona without contest, because a man making restitution payments has no appetite for discovery. There was almost nothing to divide. That was the strangest mercy of the whole thing. The marriage had been so leveraged that ending it was mostly a matter of returning keys. Ember Rye sat dark for 9 days, and I want to tell you what those 9 days were like on Fenwick Row, because the block held its breath. The staff had scattered home with their last paychecks, which cleared, because I made sure the surrendered assets covered payroll before anything else touched them. Manny with the twins. The line cooks. And Priya, who came into the Bluebird on day 3, sat at the far end of the counter, stirred her coffee 40 times, and finally said, "So you were the landlord the whole time," not as a question, and I said, "Have some pie," and that was the entire conversation we ever had about it. On day 9, I had Ray offer her the space, not gift it, offer it. A fair lease, market rate minus the discount I give every tenant on this block who shovels their own sidewalk, with the fixtures and equipment from the surrender rolled in on a purchase schedule she could actually survive. Priya read the lease 3 times at my counter, looked up, and said, "Why me?" And I told her the truth, because you came to an adult when the numbers didn't add up. That's the whole job, Priya. The rest is just cooking. She kept most of the crew. She painted over the brass, put the menu in plain type, cut the prices by 1/3. And named it 9th Street Kitchen, which I appreciated, because it's the name of a place that intends to feed people rather than impress them. It opened the week before Thanksgiving with no gala, no valet, no press table, just propped doors and the smell of short ribs going down the block, and Earl walked over from my counter to try it and reported back that it was pretty good, but the coffee's better here, which is the finest restaurant review ever delivered on Fenwick Row. And then there was Brooke. She came to the diner on a Sunday morning in early December, sat on the stool next to Walt's, never on it, next to it, and laid out her situation with a directness I hadn't heard from her in 10 years. The house was going back to the lender, the equity was fiction. Her credit was tangled in Grant's wreckage. She had a job interview in 2 weeks and a car payment in 1. And then she asked. Actually asked, out loud, no silence left on the counter for me to fill, "Mom, can you lend me some money to restart? I'll pay you back. I mean it this time, I want you to understand that everything in me wanted to say yes." 40 years of muscle memory reached for the checkbook. That's my flaw, I told you at the beginning, I buy peace with silence and money, and here was my only child, humbled and asking properly, and the yes was right there, warm and easy and fatal. Instead I poured us both coffee. And I wrote 2 options on the back of a guest check, because some conversations in my family apparently require paper now. Option 1, I said. I write you a check today. It's a real loan this time, documented, through Ray, and you pay it back on a schedule, and we are landlord and tenant about it, polite and careful, and that's what we are. Or option 2. I turned the check around. You still owe me $40,000, the money that built that restaurant. You work it off. Weekend shifts, here, waitressing, at the same wage I pay anyone, and every paycheck, half comes off the debt. It'll take years, Brooke. You'll smell like bacon on your Mondays. And somewhere in those years, you and I might figure out how to be mother and daughter again, because it turns out that only happens standing next to each other, not writing to each other. She looked at the guest check a long time. Then she looked at Walt's stool. Then she put her finger on option 2, the way she'd once put her finger on my name on a loan statement, and said, "No shortcuts. I need to not be a person who takes shortcuts anymore." Her first shift was a Saturday, and it was a catastrophe, and I mean that with all the tenderness in the world. She burned a full flat top of pancakes because she was refilling coffee she'd already refilled. She called Earl, "Sir," which offended him deeply. She dropped a tray. Cried in the walk-in for 90 seconds, came out, and finished the shift. I did not rescue her once. It was the hardest waitressing I've never done. The second Saturday was better. By the 4th, she'd learned that Father Dominic's 2 sugars are a state secret and that the night nurses tip in exact change and gratitude, and that the trick to the corner booth is serving the kids first. Somewhere around the 5th week, I heard something from the floor I hadn't heard in years, my daughter laughing, the real one, the 12-year-old's laugh, because Earl had finally forgiven her and was teaching her crossword clues between refills. I was at the flat top with my back turned, and I stood there and let the eggs go a little long. Just listening. Every payday, Ray logged the installment. She never missed one. Once, flush from her new weekday job, she got it, marketing for a hospital system, a place where the storytelling is at least about something. She tried to double a payment, and I handed half of it back. The schedule is the schedule, I told her. You don't get to buy your way to the end faster. That's the other family disease, and we're both quitting it. Thanksgiving came on a Thursday like it does, and the Bluebird did what it has done for 34 years, opened at noon for anyone on the block with nowhere better to be. It started decades ago as Walt's idea, turkey and gravy at the counter for the widowers and the shift workers, and it has grown into the closest thing Fenwick Row has to a town hall. This year the room was full. Earl at his post. The nurses, off shift for once, in actual sweaters. Father Dominic saying a grace that mentioned no one by name and everyone by implication. Marisol, Manny and the twins, half of Priya's crew after their own service wound down, and Priya herself, carrying over a tray of her short ribs as tribute between kitchens, which I placed on the counter next to my turkey like a treaty, and working the floor, in an apron, 16 installments into $40,000, was my daughter, carrying plates, remembering orders, calling Earl. At one point she stopped in the middle of the room with a coffee pot in each hand, looked around at all of it. All these people her ex-husband had called the before picture, and I watched her understand something you can't be told, only shown. This was never the neighborhood that needed elevating. After close, when it was just us and the smell of sage and the dishwasher running, she did something without asking. She took a blank index card from the stack by the register, wrote on it, and pinned it to Walt's corkboard, in among his terrible half-print, half-cursive recipes. Her cranberry sauce, the one she'd made that morning, orange peel and too much ginger, the first thing she has ever added to that board. Her handwriting next to her father's. I had to go check the walk-in for a minute. Inventory. You understand, the block, for the record, still doesn't know. As far as Fenwick Row is concerned, the fancy restaurant changed hands, the flashy son-in-law left town, and Dot's girl came home and waits tables on weekends, a story so ordinary nobody questions it, which is exactly how I like my stories told about me. Brooke knows. Ray knows. Priya knows and would sooner reveal the sugar secret. The corner lot has a new appraisal and the same old griddle, and it is not for sale, and it never was. These mornings, I still open at 5. Key in the lock, lights, flat top, first pot before my coat is off. But on Saturdays and Sundays, there's a second key 20 minutes behind mine. And 2 cups on the counter where one sat alone for 6 years, mine at the register, hers beside Walt's stool, close enough that some mornings, in the right light, before the regulars drift in out of the dark, it looks like 3. Last Sunday, at dawn, we stood at the front window with our coffee, watching the row wake up, Priya's lights coming on 3 doors down, the salt truck grumbling past, the neon buzzing to life over our heads, blue as ever. Brooke bumped her shoulder against mine and didn't say anything, and neither did I, because we've both learned what silences are for now, and it isn't money. Here's what I know, at 61, at 5 in the morning, on the corner of Fenwick and 9th. They wanted a table without me. I own the whole street the table sits on. But the only seat that ever mattered was the one beside me, and my daughter is finally back in it. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. I ran a diner for 40 years, so let me correct the recipe, it's best served accurate. No shouting, no cruelty, no theater. Just every debt on the books, every kindness remembered, every consequence delivered at exactly the temperature it was ordered. Respect isn't something family owes you automatically, I learned that the hard way. But it's also not something you can buy for them, no matter how many checks you write. It gets paid the same way it gets earned. In installments. In shifts. One Saturday at a time.